Good morning to everyone, participants, and thank you to TISA and the Okoa Uchumi Coalition for this very important meeting. I will share my presentation because I had many slides, so I'm just going to speak to it and just try and get into the key highlights. So, of course, as has been said by everyone, that the debt is a very big problem. And of course, it is also a gender issue because as the debt grows, so too does the service, the debt service increases. And of course, this is a particular problem because of the high proportion of revenue that it absorbs, taking away money from much needed services. So this is of particular interest to women because the money that is taken away from other critical issues, water, healthcare, education, housing, so ECOSOC rights. And so when we look at debt from the women's perspective and looking at whether the borrowing has been beneficial to women and women's rights, what we see is that the areas for which debt has been procured, the dominant sectors for which borrowing has been procured is mainly for physical infrastructure. So you're talking about roads, rail. Some of it has gone to agriculture, some of it to natural resources. A little has gone towards social protection, education, health, and addressing issues like violence against women. Now, in agriculture, Kenya's borrowing has been for projects and programs to enhance productivity in the sector, mainly looking at commercializing agriculture and increasing productivity and the capacity of private agricultural service providers. And while the agricultural sector has a huge potential of empowering women in terms of both improving food security and in their income, discrimination against women in this sector has undermined that potential completely. We know that according to Africa Development Bank, women make up more than 50% of the labor in agricultural sector. However, and they produce more than 80% of the food, but they only own between 1% to 5% of the land. So they're not able to control this crucial resource. So commercialization in increasing productivity does not necessarily lead to women's increased incomes. And so if their incomes even increased in agriculture, the women still do not have control over those earnings because they must defer either to their fathers, brothers, husbands, or because of the power dynamics and imbalances between men and women. And of course, this has also been further hampered by the refusal to address issues or the structural issues around land and land ownership in Kenya as per the constitution, which provides for women's land ownership. But of course, there's been resistance to this, including when looking at ancestral lands. So women still continue to operate in exclusion. So the other thing that we also look at is when increased productivity comes, the burden of unpaid care, which is predominantly done by women who must grow that food for commercial and for domestic consumption for their families. It increases the burden for them. That is still not looked at. The debt, or rather the borrowings, don't actually look at the structural inequalities within agriculture. So any borrowings to improve agriculture does not actually end up benefiting women in the long run. And not address the issues of unpaid care. Of course, infrastructure, I think many have spoken about it, but when you look at women, even though we can assume, if we were to assume that the borrowings for infrastructure were actually ideal in terms of benefiting for improvement of physical infrastructure, we look at where those roads lead to. They link either to the factories, to ports, and so are primarily servicing either the needs of huge commercial interests or foreign interests. not anything to do with women, local production, markets, traders. They are not really, it's not beneficial to them in any way. So the few women who do end up getting employed within the construction projects, where we see women in construction, you will find they're doing the lowest paying jobs, such as sweeping, cleaning of roads, waving flags. That is how women have been involved in this. So at the end of the day, much of it is not beneficial to them. When you look at spending on education and healthcare services, which, by the way, is one of the most valuable ways of improving gender equality, because it allows for shared prosperity and increases supply of decent jobs for women, improving our services and reduces women's the disproportionate burden of unpaid care on women. The preference is to incur debt in the physical infrastructure and really not the soft infrastructure. So the potential positive impact of incurring debt does not actually help women in any way, because the government does not seem to see the value of investing in that social infrastructure, healthcare, education, and the like. In fact, when we look at the COVID situation, we've seen, of course, the theft of COVID monies, because the government was able to procure quite significant amounts of loans, some of it grants, but also loans to address the COVID situation, the health impact of COVID. But according to the Ministry of Health, 54% non-compliance in antenatal and postnatal. There was a decrease, a 54% decrease in compliance in antenatal and postnatal, and at least 50% of the children below the 1 year have not received their immunization. So this in itself is a life-threatening situation and could increase the cost of health in the country significantly. Of course, we have also seen the loss of medical personnel due to infections, lack of protective gear, and those kind of things. So when we look at overall the issue around debt, the country has adopted a very aggressive taxation regimen to try and collect as much revenue as possible to be able to service this debt. However, we're not seeing these resources going towards addressing socioeconomic issues, which primarily affect women. So most of this tax, you're looking at the turnover tax, digital tax, VAT, and this has a negative effect on women, an increase in that, because women use most of their income to pay for consumable products, the fast-moving goods, rice, sugar, milk, school supplies, medicines, sanitary pads. So this revenue goes towards debt repayment, not service delivery, thereby increasing pressures for women. We appreciate very much the work that is being done by TISA and Okoa Uchumi, because one of the biggest problems that we have is that, unfortunately, very few women's rights organizations, if any, actually work on public debt or the wider microeconomic issues as an issue of critical concern to women. And it is imperative that as women, we need to begin to understand how the economy works and begin to participate in issues of how we contract debt and debt repayments and its impact on women's rights issues. So we must actively engage from the stage of debt negotiation to project design and implementation and monitoring and evaluation, much of the work that is being done right now by the Okoa Uchumi. And so, so for us, we're looking at being able to mobilize women to better understand this, and hopefully get the women to be able to raise their voice around the debt burden of the country as a gender issue.